07:42 a.m, August 10th, 1940, over the English Channel. The roar of the Merlin engine fills the cockpit, its growl vibrating through the aluminum frame of the Supermarine Spitfire. Sergeant Jack Lockett's knuckles are white, fingers clamped around the control column as he banks against the morning sun. Below, the channel churns grey and restless. Above, a squadron of Luftwaffe Messerschmitt Bf 109s cuts through the blue sky, their sleek forms angled for intercept. Lockett's heart pounds as he scans the horizon, only minutes now before contact. Then something catches his eye, a twin-engine Spitfire, experimental markings visible on its fuselage, pulling ahead of the formation. It's faster, more aggressive in the climb. How could that be? Minutes later, Lockett pulls the trigger. A burst of gunfire, crackling radio static, and the sharp whistle of an enemy fighter spiraling downward, trailing smoke. He doesn't see it clearly through the chaos, but the sudden lightness in his gut tells him something fundamental has shifted. The engineers have done it, a new weapon, a revolution written in contrails and gunfire, but that wasn't supposed to be possible. After all, the concept was deemed impractical. A foolish gamble, they said. Today, though, Jack Lockett knows better. George Phillips stands in his cluttered office at RAF Castle Bromwich, February 14, 1940, staring at a blueprint spread across a desk, scarred with pencil marks and coffee rings. Outside, the airfield hums with morning activity, mechanics oiling engines, pilots walking toward dispersal huts, and Spitfires being prepped for another day of patrols and practice sorties. The war is young, but the anxiety is already old. Phillips squints at the paper, running his hand over the sketch of a radical design. 2 Merlin engines, one mounted on each wing in a push-pull configuration. Ridiculous, he knows. A bold proposal in a conflict that's already consuming resources faster than factories can produce them. Why not? He mutters to no one in particular. The Spitfire was already exceptional, its elliptical wings and Merlin engine creating a fighter unmatched in agility and speed. But what if it could be faster? What if that narrow edge over the Messerschmitt could be widened? His colleagues had scoffed during the initial briefing. A twin-propeller design would add weight, they argued, increase drag, and compromise the Spitfire's hard-earned reputation as the premier interceptor in fighter command. Phillips wasn't convinced by their skepticism. The Luftwaffe had already demonstrated their technical capabilities with aircraft like the Bf 110, and Phillips had run the calculations dozens of times. This is the only way we outpace them, he says quietly to himself, tapping the blueprint with a worn pencil. We need to take that gamble. The idea may be considered foolish by ministry officials and conservative engineers alike, but Phillips is determined. Today, he'll present his plans to Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding's Technical Advisory Board. He gathers the blueprints, rolling them carefully, and checks his watch. The meeting is in 2 hours. Outside, a Spitfire roars overhead, its single Merlin engine singing the familiar song of British defiance. Phillips wonders if that sound will soon be doubled. Jack Lockett yawns as he performs his pre-flight checks at RAF Westhampton, March 8, 1940, adjusting the seat harness as he settles into the familiar cockpit of his Spitfire Mark I, the noise of engines cranking to life, the sharp smell of oil and high-octane fuel, and the constant background hum of aircraft taxiing are all routine now. But there's an exhaustion that creeps in with every sortie, a weariness that no amount of sleep seems to cure. The Battle of Britain hasn't officially begun, but the grinding pressure of readiness is already wearing on the pilots. Lockett starts the engine with a practiced motion, feeling the Merlin roar to life beneath him. He glances over his shoulder at the ground crew, who are too busy with another aircraft to notice his gaze. They're working double shifts, patching bullet holes, inspecting control surfaces, replacing damaged components. Yesterday's patrol had been uneventful but tense. The Luftwaffe had been probing the coastal defences, testing response times and radar coverage. Lockett still feels the stiffness in his shoulders from holding formation for 3 hours. The adrenaline fades quickly these days, leaving only fatigue and the metallic taste of oxygen mask rubber. His mind drifts to rumours circulating through the mess hall. Engineers were experimenting with something new. Twin engines, 2 propellers. The idea seemed absurd to most pilots. The Spitfire was already a handful in certain configurations. Adding complexity seemed like asking for trouble. But maybe, he thinks, maybe there was something to it. His thoughts are interrupted by the radio crackling to life. Squadron 54, airborne in 5 minutes. Possible bogies approaching from the southeast. The enemy is coming. Again, Lockett sighs, advances the throttle, and begins his taxi toward the runway. The morning sun is pale and cold. Somewhere across the channel, German pilots are doing exactly the same thing. The twin-propeller Spitfire sits in a hangar at RAF Eastleigh, May 20th, 1940, its experimental camouflage scheme still wet in places. Technicians buzz around the aircraft, making final adjustments to fuel lines and checking the synchronization of the twin Merlin engines. The aircraft is designation XF-427, the first prototype of what engineers are calling the Spitfire twin. Phillips watches from the hangar entrance, his heart pounding despite his outward calm. It's been 3 months of intensive work, redesigning the wing structure, calculating weight distribution, testing propeller configurations, and convincing skeptical officials that the project deserved resources during a time of scarcity. This is the moment of truth. One of the test pilots, Flight Lieutenant Robert Hartley, walks across the hangar floor, his boots echoing against the concrete. He's an experienced flyer, known for his steady hands and analytical mind. "Ready for another gamble, sir," Hartley says, pulling on his leather flying gloves. Phillips manages only a nod, his eyes fixed on the aircraft. The twin engines gleam dully under the hangar lights. Hartley climbs into the cockpit, runs through his checks, and signals the ground crew. The engines cough, then catch, then roar, a deeper, more complex sound than a standard Spitfire. The symmetry is perfect. The propellers spin in counter-rotating configurations to eliminate torque. Hartley taxis out into the pale spring sunlight. Phillips walks to the edge of the runway, binoculars in hand. The prototype accelerates, faster than expected, and lifts off smoothly. It climbs at an angle that makes Phillips catch his breath. Hartley's voice crackles over the radio. Climb rate exceeds projections. Handling is responsive. No vibration in the control column. Phillips watches the aircraft bank, the twin engines working in perfect harmony. It's faster than anything they've tested. The radio crackles again. Test complete. Performance is beyond expectations. Request permission to extend the flight. Phillips feels the weight of vindication settle over him. This could change everything. Jack Lockett takes off from RAF Duxford at 07:15 a.m., June 17, 1940, the familiar vibration of his Spitfire settling beneath him like an old coat. His mind is still processing the rumours about the twin-engine prototype. Command has been tight-lipped, but word travels fast among pilots. Then, as he levels off at 8,000 feet, something catches his eye. There, 2 miles to the east, a twin-engine Spitfire, marked with experimental designation codes, soaring higher and faster than any Spitfire he's seen. It's impressive, almost unsettling in its performance. He follows it for several minutes, maintaining a respectful distance. The new model moves with an authority that defies expectations. The climb rate is exceptional. The acceleration in level flight is noticeably superior. He watches it execute a series of maneuvers, barrel rolls, tight turns, climbing spirals, all performed with a grace that shouldn't be possible given the added weight. As he banks to return to base, Lockett can't help but marvel at the engineering. Maybe this so-called foolish design wasn't foolish at all. Maybe it was exactly what they needed. The morning sun reflects off the twin propellers, creating a distinctive visual signature. Below, the English countryside spreads out in patchwork greens and browns. Somewhere down there, engineers are already planning the next iteration. Back at Duxford, Lockett taxis to dispersal and shuts down his engine. The silence that follows is profound. He sits in the cockpit for a moment, thinking about what he'd witnessed. The ground crew approaches, and one of them asks if everything went well. Lockett nods. Everything went fine, he says, but things are changing. The mechanic looks at him curiously but doesn't press. Lockett climbs out, his legs stiff from the flight, and walks toward the operations room. He'll file his report, mention the prototype, and note its impressive performance. By evening, his observations will reach Phillips's desk, adding one more data point to the growing case for full production. The twin-engine Spitfire dives at 08:30 a.m., July 11, 1940, over the English Channel, its pilot pulling aggressive maneuvers as he locks onto a German Heinkel He-111 bomber, struggling to maintain formation. Flight Sergeant Michael Davies is at the controls of XF-429, the third prototype, and he's been waiting weeks for combat authorization. The twin Merlins scream as he closes the distance. He can hear the crackling of his own gunfire through the airframe. But then something goes wrong. The starboard engine coughs, misses a beat, then seizes completely. The propeller windmills uselessly, creating massive drag. Davies fights the controls, trying to compensate for the asymmetric thrust. The aircraft yaws violently to the right. He's losing altitude fast. His radio transmission is clipped and professional. Red leader, this is Red 3. Engine failure. Starboard side. I'm going down. Jack Lockett, flying cover 2,000 feet above, watches the prototype spiral toward the channel, debris trailing from the failed engine. His stomach lurches. The radio crackles with urgent transmissions. We've lost contact with Red 3. Last position marked. Search and rescue is scrambled. Lockett circles the area, scanning the water below. He sees the splash, white foam spreading across the grey surface. No parachute, no life raft visible. He keys his radio, reporting the exact coordinates, knowing they're probably too late. The formation continues its patrol, but the mood has shifted. Back at RAF Duxford, the mood in the engineering office is grim. Phillips receives the report at noon. Mechanical failure, connecting rod fracture in the starboard Merlin. The prototype had only 47 hours of flight time. The engineers had worked tirelessly, testing every component, running simulations, inspecting every weld and rivet. But war demands perfection, and even the smallest flaw becomes catastrophic at altitude. Phillips stares at the failure analysis report, his hands steady but his mind racing. This was the gamble. Every innovation carries risk, but there's no room for failure. Not now. Not when production orders are pending and pilots are dying in outdated equipment. George Phillips stands in the hangar at RAF Boscombe Down, August 1st, 1940, his face drawn with fatigue and determination. The performance of the twin-engine Spitfires has been remarkable, except for one critical, recurring flaw. The Merlin engines, when pushed to combat power settings for extended periods, are experiencing connecting rod failures at rates far exceeding acceptable thresholds. Phillips reviews the report spread across a makeshift desk. 3 engine failures in combat conditions, 2 more during high-stress testing, 1 pilot dead, 2 others injured during emergency landings. The numbers are stark and undeniable. Around him, his engineering team works in shifts, disassembling failed engines, examining metallurgical samples, and running stress calculations. The hangar smells of oil and hot metal. This is the moment of truth. Do they abandon the design? Do they recommend scrapping the prototypes and returning resources to conventional Spitfire production? Or do they push forward, believing the solution is within reach? Phillips looks at his chief metallurgist, a quiet man named Edmund Carter, who's been analyzing the failed components under microscope and spectrograph. Carter looks up, exhaustion evident in his eyes. The connecting rods are failing at the stress points where heat concentration is highest. We need a different alloy, higher nickel content, better tempering process. Phillips nods slowly. How long? Carter doesn't hesitate. 3 weeks if we prioritize it. Maybe 4. Phillips does the mental calculation. 3 weeks. In that time, how many pilots will die in conventional Spitfires facing superior numbers? How many bombers will reach London? How many opportunities will be lost? He looks at his team. We fix this, he says quietly. We've come too far to back down now. His voice is firm, but inside, Phillips feels the crushing weight of responsibility. Every decision, every modification, every test flight is another roll of the dice. But he believes, he has to believe, for the pilots, for Britain, for the future that depends on this gamble paying off. The work continues through the night. The sun casts long shadows across RAF Boscombe. Down at 05 Rizal PM, August 15th, 1940, as the modified twin-engine Spitfire XF-4381 soars across the sky, its engines producing a harmonious roar that sounds almost musical. The latest modifications have addressed the connecting rod failures that plagued earlier models. New alloy compositions, improved cooling channels, and revised power management protocols have transformed the design from promising to practical. Phillips watches from beside the runway, his hands in his pockets, a quiet satisfaction evident in his posture. This is it, the breakthrough. Flight Lieutenant Hartley is at the controls again, putting the aircraft through the most demanding test sequence yet devised. Combat power for extended duration, sharp maneuvers under maximum load, repeated climbs to altitude, everything that had caused failures before. The engines maintain perfect synchronization, no vibration, no hesitation. The performance data streaming back to the engineering team confirms what Phillips already knows. They've solved it. The aircraft banks sharply, executing a series of maneuvers that demonstrate both power and precision. Hartley's voice comes through clearly on the radio. All systems nominal, engine temperatures well within acceptable range. Control response is excellent. This bird wants to fight. Other engineers gather around Phillips, watching the prototype climb and dive with an ease that seems to mock the laws of physics. This is no longer a gamble. This is the future. As XF-431 makes its final approach, the setting sun glints off the twin propellers, creating a distinctive visual signature that will soon become familiar across fighter command. The aircraft touches down smoothly, rolls to a stop, and the engines wind down with a satisfied sigh. Hartley climbs out, removes his helmet and walks over to Phillips. "She's ready," he says simply. Phillips nods, allowing himself a small smile. Production authorization should come through within days. By month's end, the first operational aircraft will roll off the assembly lines. The Battle of Britain is entering its most critical phase, and Fighter Command is about to gain a weapon that will shift the balance. Jack Lockett banks sharply at 11:30 a.m., September 7th, 1940, over London, his hands steady on the controls of his newly assigned twin-engine Spitfire, designation FL-204. The aircraft responds instantly to his inputs, the twin Merlins providing power he'd never imagined possible. Below, the city sprawls in all directions, and above, a formation of German Dornier, Do-17 bombers is attempting to reach their targets. Lockett's squadron has intercepted them near the Thames estuary. He selects his target, a bomber on the formation's periphery, and closes the distance rapidly. The speed advantage is overwhelming. Where a conventional Spitfire would need precious seconds to position for attack, the twin-engine model seems to leap forward. He lines up the shot, leading the target slightly, and presses the firing button. The 8 Browning machine guns roar, sending a stream of 303 rounds into the bomber's port, engine, and fuselage. The effect is immediate and devastating. Smoke pours from the Dornier's engine. Pieces of cowling tear away. The bomber drops out of formation, beginning a slow, inevitable descent. Lockett pulls up and away, breathing hard, his heart pounding. He looks back over his shoulder, watching the bomber spiral downward, trailing smoke and debris. The crew is bailing out, parachutes blossoming white against the industrial haze. This is not just another victory. This is confirmation. The twin-engine Spitfire works. It delivers on every promise the engineers made. The speed, the climb rate, the sustained combat power, all of it translates into tactical advantage that saves lives and protects the city below. Lockett rejoins his formation, scanning the sky for additional threats. His wingman, Flying Officer Peter Chambers, also flying a twin-engine variant, confirms 2 more bombers damaged and turning back. The raid is breaking apart. The radio chatter is excited but professional. Squadron leader confirms 7 bombers downed, 4 more damaged. No friendly losses. As Lockett turns for home, descending through broken clouds, he allows himself a moment of reflection. And it's all thanks to an engineer's gamble. A gamble that paid off when it mattered most. Jack Lockett sits in the mess hall at RAF West Hampnet at 03:30 p.m, October 4th, 1940. His flying helmet resting on the scarred wooden table beside a half-empty cup of coffee that's gone cold. The war is far from over, but something fundamental has shifted in the last month. The twin-engine Spitfires are no longer experimental oddities, but standard equipment across multiple squadrons. The production lines at Castle Bromwich and Southampton are running at capacity, turning out the new variants as fast as skilled workers can assemble them. The impact is measurable and significant. Interception rates have improved by an estimated 18%. Bomber formations reaching their targets have dropped by nearly a quarter. Pilot confidence, that intangible but crucial factor, has noticeably increased. Around Lockett, other pilots talk in the weary, matter-of-fact tones of men who've seen too much. They discuss tactics specific to the twin-engine variant, sharing lessons learned in combat. The aircraft handles differently in certain situations. The increased weight requires adjustments to landing approaches. The twin engines demand more careful monitoring, but provide redundancy that has already saved lives. George Phillips enters the mess hall, his uniform rumpled from long hours in the engineering offices. He's not a regular visitor to operational squadrons, but today he's conducting informal interviews with pilots, gathering field reports that will inform the next iteration of improvements. Lockett notices him and nods in acknowledgement. Phillips approaches, and the 2 men share a moment of mutual respect. "We did it," Phillips says quietly, sitting down across from Lockett. "We really did it." Lockett looks out the window, watching a flight of 4 twin-engine Spitfires take off in tight formation, their combined roar shaking the glass. The afternoon sun catches the spinning propellers, creating brief rainbows in the exhaust haze. The battle continues. Luftwaffe raids still come daily, and men still die in burning aircraft. But today, They've won something more than a single engagement. They've gained an edge. Phillips drinks from Lockett's abandoned coffee, makes a face at the temperature, and settles in to listen to operational feedback. Outside, the war grinds on. The twin-engine Spitfire has become more than an aircraft by November 20th, 1941. It has become a symbol, a tangible representation of British ingenuity and adaptation under pressure. The design once dismissed as impractical is now featured in recruitment posters and newsreel footage. Factory workers assembling the aircraft understand they're building something significant. Pilots request assignment to twin-engine squadrons. The numbers tell a compelling story. From August 1940 through November 1941, twin-engine Spitfire squadrons have recorded combat loss rates approximately 15% lower than conventional single-engine squadrons operating under similar conditions. The improved climb rate and speed have translated into measurably better interception success. The redundancy of twin engines has allowed dozens of pilots to return safely after suffering combat damage that would have been fatal in single-engine aircraft. George Phillips, now promoted to Chief Engineer for Advanced Fighter Development, sits in his expanded office at the Air Ministry in London, reviewing production reports and combat statistics. The journey from that first blueprint in February 1940 to full operational deployment has been extraordinary. The setbacks, the doubt, the relentless pressure to prove the concept, and the tragic loss of test pilots along the way, all of it had seemed overwhelming at the time. But they had persevered. The design had been refined through thousands of hours of testing and combat experience. Manufacturing processes had been optimized. Training protocols had been developed and disseminated throughout fighter command. Phillips looks at a photograph on his desk showing XF-427, the first prototype, taken at Eastleigh in May 1940. That aircraft no longer exists, having been disassembled for metallurgical analysis after completing its test program. But its legacy continues in every twin-engine Spitfire that climbs into British skies. Outside his window, London is recovering from another night of bombing. The Blitz continues, though with less intensity than months before. Air superiority remains contested, but is gradually shifting in Britain's favour. We were just doing our jobs, Phillips thinks, reading through a report from Fighter Command Headquarters, but sometimes a little crazy can save the day. Sometimes taking the gamble makes all the difference. The twin-engine Spitfires lead the charge at 02:00 p.m., December 10th, 1941, over occupied France, cutting through broken clouds in tight formation. 6 aircraft from No. 54 Squadron, each bearing the distinctive twin-engine configuration that's become increasingly common across fighter command. Jack Lockett leads the formation, his aircraft FL-204 still performing reliably after hundreds of combat hours. The mission is a fighter sweep ahead of a bomber formation targeting rail yards near Lille. The objective is to clear German fighters and provide protection for the slower, more vulnerable bombers. Intelligence suggests significant Luftwaffe presence in the area. The engines hum their steady rhythm, an audible promise of power and reliability. At altitude, the air is bitter cold despite the heating systems. Frost forms at the edges of the canopy. Lockett scans the sky constantly, relying on both his eyes and the primitive but improving radar systems to detect enemy aircraft. The radio crackles with position updates and tactical information. Bogies spotted at Angels 15, heading northeast. Formation of 6, possibly BF 109s. Lockett acknowledges the report and adjusts his heading slightly. The twin engines respond instantly, providing acceleration that still impresses him despite months of familiarity. The squadron moves as a coordinated unit, each pilot understanding his role and trusting his wingman. They engage the German fighters in a swirling dogfight that lasts less than 10 minutes, but feels like hours. The superior performance of the twin-engine Spitfires is evident. They outclimb and out-accelerate the Messerschmitts in nearly every encounter. Lockett personally damages 2 enemy aircraft, both forced to disengage and retreat eastward. The squadron returns to base with minor damage to 2 aircraft and no losses. As they approach the English coast, Lockett reflects on the journey from that first sighting of the experimental prototype in June 1940 to this moment. Without that gamble, without Phillips' persistence and the sacrifice of test pilots like Davies, they wouldn't be here. The technological edge they now possess might be measured in percentages and statistics, but it translates directly into survival and success. George Phillips stands outside a hangar at RAF Duxford on March 30th, 1943, watching a new generation of pilots receive training on the twin-engine Spitfire. The aircraft has continued to evolve. Recent variants incorporate improved engines, upgraded armament, and refined aerodynamics based on combat experience and ongoing engineering development. The war has expanded far beyond British skies, and twin-engine Spitfires are now operating in the Mediterranean, North Africa, and are being evaluated for deployment in the Far East. The design that began as a desperate gamble has matured into a proven platform. Phillips is older now, greyer, carrying the weight of years spent in high-pressure development work. He's watched the twin-engine program grow from a single prototype to a substantial portion of Fighter Command's inventory. He's read the after-action reports, attended the funerals of pilots lost in combat, and celebrated the victories. The legacy of his design lives on, a silent but constant reminder of how a single idea, once dismissed as foolish, can change the trajectory of history. A young pilot, fresh from training, approaches Phillips and asks about the aircraft's development history. Phillips considers how to answer, thinking back to that morning in February 1940 when he'd first sketched the twin-engine configuration. He remembers the skepticism, the technical challenges, the failures, and the breakthroughs. It started with a question, Phillips says. What if we could make the Spitfire faster? The answer required taking risks that seemed unreasonable at the time. The young pilot nods, perhaps not fully understanding the magnitude of what Phillips is describing. He thanks Phillips and walks toward his assigned aircraft. Phillips watches him go, then turns his attention back to the flight line. 4 twin-engine Spitfires taxi out in sequence, their engines producing that distinctive paired roar. They take off one by one, climbing into the pale spring sky, each aircraft a testament to persistence and engineering excellence. Phillips knows his work isn't finished. The war continues, and new challenges constantly emerge, but today, watching these aircraft disappear into the distance, he allows himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The final assessment of the twin-engine Spitfire program, filed with the Air Ministry on June 15, 1943, contains statistics that would have seemed impossible in February 1940. Over 2,800 twin-engine variants have been produced across multiple facilities. Combat effectiveness ratings consistently exceed those of conventional single-engine fighters in comparable roles. The design has been validated through the most demanding testing environment possible: sustained aerial combat against a determined and capable enemy. Jack Lockett, now a squadron leader with multiple decorations for distinguished service, occasionally reflects on his role in the program's history. He was there for the first combat trials, witnessed the failures and the successes, and helped develop the tactical doctrines that maximize the aircraft's capabilities. His survival through years of combat is due partly to skill, partly to luck, and partly to the technological edge provided by Phillips' gamble. George Phillips has moved on to other projects. his expertise now directed toward jet propulsion and other emerging technologies. But the twin-engine Spitfire remains his most visible legacy. The aircraft that experts said couldn't work, that would be too heavy, too complex, too expensive, has proven itself in the crucible of war. The impact extends beyond mere numbers. The twin-engine Spitfire demonstrated that innovation under pressure is possible, that conventional wisdom can be challenged successfully, and that calculated risks can yield extraordinary returns. Other aircraft designers studying the program have taken lessons that will influence aviation development for years to come. The war will continue for another 2 years, and the twin-engine Spitfire will serve throughout, gradually being supplemented by newer designs but never fully replaced. In the official history being compiled by military historians, the program will receive a brief mention, a footnote to larger narratives of battles and campaigns, but those who flew the aircraft, those who built it, and those whose lives were saved by its superior performance will remember it differently. The file closed without additional comment, the numbers having already rewritten the air war over Europe, one sortie at a time.